Hi, everyone. This is NedFeb. Uh, Today, I'm going to give my assessment of the rare earth market. To note, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm a guy in a basement. Take whatever I say with caution. So, to begin, the rare earth market is one of those very lucky few that has had true real growth within the past few years. What I mean by real growth is growth adjusted for inflation. The compound annual growth rate is roughly 10.8% between the COVID years and has an expected growth rate of 12.6% until 2026. Given that inflation is roughly 6.5% using the Fisher equation, which arguably is the most pretentious way to do this, we can assume that real growth is somewhere around 4%, which, considering the massive supply issues the market has underwent, is superb. Now, really, these market fluctuations are due to a cacophony of things, but a part of that has to do with the war that's going on in the Ukraine, as well as the issues that the U.S. has had with China in the past year or so. So fundamentally, short-term market disruptions are withholding growth, with the trade issues between China and the U.S. causing large discrepancies. So I just want to confirm that by short-term issues, I don't necessarily mean issues that are short-term. I know that's really confusing, but I mean issues that are not based on the composition of the market, but are rather external to it and can be resolved within a somewhat short horizon. And a horizon short, I mean, is less than 5 years. So basically, China is going to be a central feature across this whole assessment of the market. And I'm going to get into that soon. But before I get to there, let's take a look at the general composition. Semiconductors or magnets are taking most of the blame for the growth, with them being in literally everything you and me see every day. From your milk frother to your light or lamp or anything that basically has two switches. I see some of those machines now for milk or coffee, and they just, oh my god, it's crazy. But regardless, if there's an object you own that uses electricity or some sort of power and has more than two signals into it, or two or more rather, it has a semiconductor. It's important to know what exactly a semiconductor is, and I feel that pretty much no one I know knows what they are. Even I didn't know what they were until I started researching for this video, and I have like a particular interest in computers itself. So a semiconductor is basically a material that passes a charge between a conductor and an insulator. I kind of see it like an electric bridge or more like an outflow dam. So with an electronic device that needs tens and hundreds of leagues of connections, these things end up being super important because they literally dictate the entire way that these products work. So right now, these semiconductors are arguably the most important light rare earth product, especially when you consider the political significance regarding the fact that really most of the production occurs in Taiwan. I do believe that some happens in the US, but it's just so much in Taiwan, and so many countries are physically unable of pretty much making it just due to the fact that their manufacturing isn't that great yet. It really is something that there is a dominance over, and arguably, I think that the reason that Xi Jinping has been uh, so willing to fight over Taiwan is because China doesn't have the potential to manufacture these things. I mean, there's a whole story about the ballpoint pen where basically they couldn't manufacture a ballpoint pen for a really like ridiculously long amount of time. Then like Keqiang figured that out, and then they figured out how to do it, but it was like 100 years too late or something. But fundamentally, it doesn't look like their market is totally capable of developing high end products at the moment. So, what's the big problem with the rare earth market? It's mainly attributed to the nature of the resource. 60% of rare earth production comes from China, which I bet is not particularly happy to be trading with their enemies, which is the US in this instance. But the money that comes in is just too good. Now, here in the West, we're not so happy to buy from them, but we can't not have them because they're literally in everything. And I'll get to that later why they're so important. Well, what do we do? On one hand, there's Shkarol. On the other hand, there's morality. On an individual level, I guess we're generally moral, being somewhat confined to the limits of what we think is okay, but at the end of the day, ease and comfort push those boundaries a little further. Now, there is a breaking point. We are like rubber bands. I feel like it's going to come soon, but I can't feasibly determine when or how. Okay, enough of that. Let's take a look at this graph over here. So, the basic principle with this thing is that neodymium, that never gets easier to pronounce for some reason. It's always horrible. Is the most important substance right now, or at least in terms of the volume it has. So this data, if I'm not wrong, was collected in the middle of 2022, and it is speculative. So the numbers predicted for 2023, 2024, so on are obviously not. They haven't happened yet, so they're speculative. And the year for 2022 is not totally complete, if I'm not, because it was taken in the middle of it. So those numbers aren't really extremely predictive of the following future, especially considering the potential for political strife. Now, what is neodymium? That's a really important thing. It's basically magnets. Literally, like the whole magnet that anything is created, like a magnet, the alloy that a magnet is a mixture of neodymium, iron, and boron. That's the name, NedFeb. And because of that, those three elements are somewhat related in their market share. So, I always find it kind of funny. This is a little anecdote like a thought I wanted to share. You know that it's Always in Sunny Philadelphia episode where Charlie's trying to make a dating profile and Dennis and Mac ask for his hobbies and he says magnets? I like to think that when the gang is asleep, he's mining for neodymium, preparing for the end of the world, only to make magnets for more shenanigans. Well, the important thing you get from this graph, it's growing. It's growing pretty fast. The graph is speculative, as I said before, and I believe that I will put the info in some sort of a document for later. So now let's begin with the four-headed octopus, or the U.S., China, Africa, and Southwest and Southeast Asia. Yes, I am aware that both Africa and the southern portion of Asia are made up of different countries with vast cultural and political diversity. But by my analysis, has weirdly found them all to share a similar niche in terms of their relationship with the US and China. So, Africa and Southern Asia both have a relative mix of Western and Chinese influence. For example, the US has installations across sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, while China has its premier international base in Djibouti, as well as the pro-China states in Southeast Asia and Pakistan. These regions of the world all have a large supply of rare earth metals, which the graph can show. And I guess the US is looking to, or we are looking to tap into that. The tensions between the US and China have made these areas unstable to a degree, and which in turn detracts from the market growth, as speculators and deep value investors alike are not hopeful in the medium term. The Air Force General Mike Minihan predicted a war with China in 2025, which, may detract from the market, but rendering 90% of the resources unusable, just because of the fact that 60% of the production happens in China, but 90% of the refining happens in China, which those are just crazy numbers. It's just because it is so dangerous and environmentally unfriendly, and in the West, we just have regulations against that. So it's important for me to indicate here that the U.S. has a really heavy reliance on foreign supplies. The U.S. is interesting because it's one of the few countries on Earth that everything else shuts down. If every country is ripped off the planet, it would definitely suffer tremendously. But I feel that if the cards are played correctly, there is a chance that it could survive, which a lot of things can't be said. For example, with China, they import almost all their food. They couldn't survive without other countries. The U.S. has, of course, it's so built on the rest of the world, and with this global world now, it's not like I can say it'll be fine, but it does have the resource potential to actually still keep going to a degree. So if you look at a country like India, for example, in the in the northeast of India, there's a lot of Chinese influence, just because the people there are, descended from, or rather from a similar group of them, in the sense of, like, the language there is a little bit more in the Sino-Tibetan variety of language diaspora, and the area is contested, and China is trying to intrude there, as well as in Pakistan with the Himalayan territory, as well as the Chinese backing of attacks in Kashmir and whatever. Southeast Asia is even more in a predicament, just because of the fact that on one hand they really enjoy the cultural and economic benefit of the U.S. as partners, but they also are so culturally related to the Chinese with the language and the people. It's not really feasible for me to see if they'd side on one directly. I know that certain countries have trade deals with the West, and there, a lot of them are, I've heard of that CETO maybe coming back. I don't know about that, but I've heard about it. Like Malaysia has their deals with Australia and whatnot, but something like Singapore, which is a pro-China state, it does so much dealing with the U.S. and U.S. citizens, but it's, the language is Chinese. The people there are often from, second generation descendants from China mainland. So it's really difficult to say where they're gonna really do anything. And looking at the numbers, the second or tied for second, the second largest producer of rare earth metals in terms of reserves is in Vietnam, which is a country that is a prime example of this. And Africa is also similar in this sense. There's huge deposits, and it can be tapped in readily, but it's just the infrastructure is not there. But both countries, the U.S. and China, are trying to contest over that, so it's not really feasible that I can say that one side has a significantly larger soft power here. I do feel that most countries to some degree will eventually side with the US just because of the cultural influence that they have, but I can't be sure, and that's something that really is dependent on how the next few years goes. So let's take a look at this graph over here just to get better insight. Yeah, if you can see here, the whole world has a ton of mines. The U.S. has a ton of deposits, but we only have one mine. That's in Mountain Pass Mine in, I believe, San Bernardino County, California. The company that mines there is called MP Materials, which I've had the absolute joy of being able to talk to about their prospects. But I will get into that in a moment. But the whole principle here is that we're just not tapping into our resources because of how dangerous it is. And arguably, we shouldn't right now because China's supplying it to us. Let them drain theirs first, and then we'll take from there. But one of the big issues with this whole situation is just it's all the infrastructure in China, and they're making everything, and the U.S. isn't really taking it. So we'll see what happens. Okay. Now let's take a look at an example of what rare earths are used and why this is important in the next 3 years. So remember, Mike Minihan predicted, or Mark Minihan, that 2025 is going to be the year that we go to war. Predator drones, smart bombs, Tomahawk cruise missiles, night vision goggles, F-22 fighter jets, which aren't produced anymore, but or maybe they're. I'm not totally sure. Bulletproof vests, Bradley tanks, radar detection, nuclear submarines. All of them require so much of this stuff, right? I'm not totally sure about the numbers. I do know that a Virginia class submarine requires 9,200 pounds of rare earth to work. Electric cars is something else. I couldn't find the numbers for those, so I'm assuming they're proprietary, but they're really something. I guess all the eggheads were focused on military and not really on anything else. So who can say? So let's go to the next thing. Sorry, let me just go. So the idea behind neodymium. Once again, neodymium is like literally magnets, right? It's literally the whole thing behind magnets, and that's how they work. It needs that element. Once I ever repeat that the neodymium magnet is a composition of neodymium, iron, and boron. They're used for literally anything. So maybe if you're a speculator, look into the source of iron and boron. They could be heavily related to neodymium, especially if you're trying to guess market trends. They're required in virtually everything too, but beyond magnets, they're also required in glass and lens manufacturing. And now here's where I get to MP Materials. I keep bringing them up because they have one of the best investor relation teams in the market. Very fast, insightful, and frankly hope-inducing responses. I mean, I don't know if I can necessarily say it's a good thing, but from what they were saying, everything looked beautiful. Beyond that, in my mind, they just look like a good long-term buy. Remember, I'm not a financial advisor, so I can't tell you to buy it or advise you to buy it, but I bought it. So, or rather, there was an account that existed, which I purchased. So it's really a valuable thing in my mind. They're the only mine in the U.S., and I repeat that, I mean the only mine in the U.S., and it's in San Bernardino, California. I spoke with them a little bit, and they said one of the issues with them, the processing, is that they still have to send their magnets, like the oxide, the ore itself, to China to process. So they're not having, they're not capable of doing DoD contracts because it's not sourced in the U.S. They are having issues of just getting it here because after a while, it just takes some time just to transport it. But that really, they're working on getting the processing plant here. So in a few years, I imagine the stock price is going to blow up. So let's take a look at this. Neodymium is the most profitable rare earth, nearly 30% of market share and a 2.07 billion market cap of 2021. Although this may be apocryphal, the sourcing I found wasn't necessarily the most. Well, it wasn't that it wasn't accurate. It was just that there were so many different sources and they were saying different things, and I just picked the number that was kind of in the middle. I was seeing a lot of 600 million, a lot of 4 billion. So I couldn't really determine which is the most accurate, but this is a reliable source that I remember, and they said 2 billion. So if you look at it, yeah, one of the issues here is that the demand for neodymium is increasing, and the exploration is predicted to increase heavily, and recycling is kind of staying the same. But the total production of neodymium is, you know, it's not really going up, which could be a problem. It could make a really big issue with like a with the pricing if it just gets too expensive, and that just has to do with the fact that there's a limited amount, and the producer has kind of found like you must have heard of the peak oil theory. With that, I think arguably with this production that might have occurred, but there is of course there's issues that would eventually get better at it, but we'll see from there. So the next thing, sorry, this slideshow. So once again, if I take a look at this graph, you can see obviously neodymiums are so prevalent in this, and it's really not anything. It's so much of the share of the market. It's the literal tallest thing there, and it almost looks like it encompasses 50% of the market, so it's huge. Okay. Oh, sorry, I went in the wrong direction. So the MIC production. So the military industrial complex literally needs this stuff because it's everything requires it. The F-35 Lightning II requires 920 pounds of rare earths. China has exclusive claim to 90% of the world's mines, and Mineral Security Act has been pushing China out of the rare earth market. That means we have to get it from somewhere else, right? So erbium, terbium, neodymium, and yttrium are the main ones. If you look at this graph over here, the China that was produced by Statista, which I think is relatively accurate at the time. Sorry, let me go back. The China is still producing the vast majority, but the U.S., Myanmar, Australia, Thailand, and India, and the other countries are really getting up there. So there is a possibility that in a few years' time, China doesn't have the global monopoly over it anymore, which is super important, but which could also create a much more strife because so much of their economy is based around that, and I'll explain that why in a moment. So, of course, once again, literally everything uses it. I don't really have to go over this, but I just wanted to show once more how intrinsic they are in the military. So if we take a look here at the areas with the rich rare earth deposits in mainland China, you'll notice that their cities are all literally built around them directly. Like their whole economy is based around these things, especially the most populous provinces. The only real exception here, I'd say, is Shanghai and Beijing. And I'd argue that that's pretty much just due to the fact that one's an economic district and the other one's is a governmental one, so they don't really necessarily need production. But look at this. Look at where Guangdong is in the whole region of Guangxi. In Fujian has a larger operation too. The Chengdu, the city of Chengdu in Sichuan is not that far from it. Changzhou, I'm sorry about the pronunciation. I know I'm butchering this like no tomorrow, but what can I say? Baotao is there, Shandong, the region has the Weishan thing, and then they're just huge. Like the large population center of mainland China is in the south, and that's where all the rare earth is, and that's why it's a big deal to them because I would almost say their economy is built on this. Besides manufacturing, this is the next thing they have. So of course, it makes sense why the country would be angry about the U.S. trying to pressure them out with rare earth metals because it's just besides that manufacturing's leaving, right? Because the population's getting more educated, they're getting more influence from the West, I guess. And I just you must have heard of the Lie Flat movement. I just don't think they are supporting the government as much anymore. And it's an autocratic government at the moment. I don't really know if I could really say that it even operates in a way that's really astray from a dictatorship at this point, but yeah, it's something else. Okay. As of 2019, the country had 62% of sorry, I apologize for that noise. In 62% of the whole world's economy was produced by China. Now, after that was Australia. I mean, rather the U.S., then Australia and Myanmar. I don't know why they put it like that. That's so annoying. The graph here is like, yeah, whatever. But Russia, India, Madagascar, and others. It's just I don't know. It's crazy, and it's really just indicative of the whole market. But it is decreasing. So the other countries do have more of a share. Okay, so now the future. Rare earths will play a more important role in geopolitics, I feel. Taiwan's processing plants, the U.S. focus on smart weapons, and southwest, and Southeast Asian political turmoil will definitely dictate the way these things go. U.S. aligned rare earths are likely going to obtain significant U.S. investments, so probably put your money in those. I mean, I can't say anything, but I'm not saying that that's advice, but I'm saying that that's a thing that you could do. Proxy wars over supply seem inevitable, and domestic processing is likely to increase. I want to show this photo. When I searched up rare earth mine, this was a photo that came. It's not I didn't create this photo. I wish I did. It's so beautiful. But I want to remind you that this rare earth stuff is really damaging the environment, and no matter how beautiful this is, in a way, this is destruction. You just see the roads and everything, and just remember what we're trying to protect. Ultimately, it's the world, and that's there's the whole thing behind. Oh, we have other planets to go to. Where? I mean, nowhere soon, right? So keep that in mind when you make purchases, I guess. Okay, enough of that. Thank you for listening to me. Yeah, that's the end of this recording.